Chicago-elect, mayor-elect Brandon Johnson, he's going to be in Springfield today, visiting with state lawmakers. A joint session of the Illinois House and Senate. Noon is when that speech happens, and we'll see what he has to say. Governor J.B. Pritzker has previously said that, the mayor-elect of Chicago, he's got a lot on his plate, a tall order ahead. Here's the governor in New York earlier this week talking about all the things that the
I think the mayor's biggest focus is making sure that we balance the budget of the city while at the same time, focusing on the communities that really, for the most part, have been left out in Chicago and left behind.
Now, what kinds of policies is Brandon Johnson looking to implement? Of course, he's laid out different types of ways to raise more revenue. The governor pushing back on some of those ideas, like the transaction tax. He says that's not a good idea because you could have financial brokers essentially just say, we're going to set up our servers in another state that doesn't have a financial transaction tax. Interesting that they recognize that aspect, but when it comes to other burdens on businesses in Illinois, it's not necessarily recognized on the difference between Illinois and other states. But one thing that some are hoping that the incoming mayor of Chicago addresses when he arrives in Springfield is the issue of crime. And I talked with Clark Carricker. He is the vice president of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. They had their Chamber Day event yesterday here in Springfield, and Clark said that he hopes that the mayor does address violence.
Chicago and its crime has become a national issue, one that impacts retail and tourism, particularly. Those two are backbones of the Chicago economy.
So Brandon Johnson, he did release a statement on what happened over the weekend with the hundreds of youth taking to the streets and dozens of them committing crimes, including a shooting that broke out, and not just in certain pockets of, impoverished communities. No, it was very much in some busy areas in broad daylight even. People jumping on cars, committing acts of vandalism, a variety of things. But Brandon Johnson, he did put out a statement via Twitter where he talked about, his reaction and ultimately saying that he doesn't condone violence. He says, in no way do I condone the destructive activity that we saw on the Loop and Lakefront this weekend. It's unacceptable and has no place in our city. However, he says, it's not constructive to demonize youth who have otherwise been starved of opportunities in their communities. I talked with John Cabello. He is a Republican state representative out of Rockford. He's also a police officer. And he said that he's glad that Johnson didn't condone any of the crime.
But you can't make excuses for criminal activity. You just can't. If it was his property that was damaged, his car that was set on fire, would he have the same reaction? If so, then let's start parking his vehicles out there, making sure that his property's out there, and see how he deals with it.
So again, Johnson's going to be delivering an address to Illinois state lawmakers today. Noon is when that's expected, and you'll have a joint session of the Illinois House and Senate. So we'll be tracking what he has to say and bringing you those highlights tomorrow here on WMAY. But one thing that we've seen in the past is the ongoing concerns of the power dynamic at the State House, and that power dynamic has Democrats dominating. Democrats have the vast majority of seats in the House. They have a supermajority in the House. They have a supermajority in the Senate, meaning they don't need Republicans on anything. They can get all of their members in line and pass whatever policy issues they want to pass. I think the House has, 74 Democrats? They only need 61 to get stuff through. So they can even peel some off on politically unpopular things and advance certain policies. And they've shown to have done that time and again for the past few years here when they have that supermajority. But some have been for years trying to rein in the power dynamic here. We've even had previous conversations with the likes of State Representative Brad Halbrook, where he's talked about wanting to essentially split the state in two. And this is an idea that he's floated a few times in the past. He doesn't have that idea filed this year, but he had it in the previous General Assembly to split the state in two. And he says that a split would bring about a more even hand to the power divide in Illinois.
This is what I've said for over 4 years, is when you have these large population centers that we have in these states, they control the rest of them. And how we manage and deal with that is the question on the table in my mind.
So, again, he doesn't have that proposed this time. It probably wouldn't advance if he did. But he had another suggestion here I think is kind of interesting in how to bring about some balance to that power divide. Because right now we elect state senators and state representatives based on population. So each state representative has the same population. Each state senator has the same population. There are 2 representatives to 1 senator district. He's suggesting a different approach similar to what the federal government does. Because the U.S. Congress, there's 435 members of the U.S. House, but there's 100 members of the U.S. Senate. And while the members of the House are apportioned per population, and they're elected by, population size, the Senate, it doesn't matter the size of the state. Each state gets 2 senators. So while California is a huge state, they've got 2 senators. Delaware, a small state, they've got 2 senators. And what that does is it shows we're not a democracy in this country. We're a constitutional republic in this country. And that power dynamic, yes, the House can pass with a democracy, majority rule in the House, in the U.S. House, but in the U.S. Senate, it's a much more difficult hurdle to get over when you have the same amount of power from Delaware being able to cancel out whatever comes out of California. Or I should, use like North Dakota or, some other plains states that are really small but still have 2 senators, right? So that kind of shows how, yes, democracy rules in the U.S. House, but in the U.S. Senate, it's set up to be a check on that democracy rules, right? So it's not just mob rule. The minority party can have, and those in rural areas can have some substantial power and say and sway in the U.S. Senate. Halbrook is proposing, not officially, but floating the idea of bringing about that federalist type system in Illinois.
Does it call for new states to be created in all these other states where they have large population centers? Or, the other solution would to go back and continue to elect state reps by population, but elect state senators by counties.
So Halbrook floating the idea of, hey, we can continue to elect state reps by population, but when it comes to state senators, why not just have, a state senator per county? That way, small rural counties still have, 1 state senator versus Cook County that has 1 state senator. Interesting idea. I think it's worth unpacking a bit more if we're really concerned about having that power dynamic balance a bit more instead of just having one power run over the states. But State Representative LaShawn Ford, he's also been one to sound off on this, and he says that the idea of splitting the state in 2 is just a bad idea, he says.
Well, it has benefits for the state. When you compare the revenue that's generated from the hotels and the restaurants and property taxes from the north, the rural parts of Illinois should be happy to be a part of a state that's so diverse.
And Ford went on to talk more about the importance of Chicago in the overall scheme of things.
They would be on the hook to repay all of that. And that's a big problem. So immediately the divide will really be tragic for their communities.
Halbrook pushing back on that, even saying that, rural communities survived long before Illinois began taxing them, and they will survive then. He also said, where do you think Chicago gets all their food from? Rural communities. So how are we going to balance that power dynamic? Interesting debates that I guess will continue on and on and on and on, and we'll dip into it from time.